Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Ksenia, and in this video I will be talking about all the books I read in June. It'll be a wrap-up of sorts, a little bit late, but better late than ever, and I actually managed to continue a couple books, so I'll be giving that perspective here too, but I won't be repeating the books I already mentioned in the mid-month updates, so check that out if you want to hear about Gift from the Sea, Summer Book, My Antonia, Edith Wharton's Summer, and a little bit of Sonnets of the Portuguese I mentioned in my Poetry Mondays video. I did finish them, and I think they're amazing. Honestly, the language in them is a little bit purposefully older, or like more archaic than when she was actually writing it, but it was still very accessible for me. And I do struggle a little bit to read older English, so the fact that I could still enjoy it says that, first of all, maybe my scope of reading is widening slowly through too much reading, but also that it's very accessible. And I also finished Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton. He did not resonate with me as a whole because he's a little bit too religious in a way that I'm more spiritual, but I really loved some of his thoughts on vocation and silence. I thought they were really brilliant, honestly. He also talks about words and how words are a kind of smokescreen or distraction at times. And I thought that was so relevant because sometimes I find that I love reading, as you can probably tell, like I read a ton, but being in nature and being surrounded by silence, it nourishes the soul in a different way. And the more I think about it, and some other books I read actually on the way the mind works, which I'll be talking about in later videos, but anyways, he talks about words in a way that I very much relate to, because I think that in silence you can find a kind of wisdom and depth of presence that too much words and too much thinking in words doesn't help. And I love this quote, which says, "The solitary life, being silent, clears away the smokescreen of words that man has laid down between his mind and things. In solitude, we remain face to face with the naked being of things. And yet we find that the nakedness of reality which we have feared is neither a matter of terror nor for shame. It is closed in the friendly communion of silence, and this silence is related to love. The world our words have attempted to classify, to control, and even to despise because they could not contain it, comes close to us, for silence teaches us to know reality by respecting it where words have defiled it." This really reminded me of a book I read once on the way the mind works and how the left and right hemispheres of our brain are, how the more logical minded side is much more about words and drawing divisions between things. And words help with that. They help separate this from that and draw all of these divisions between things. And how creativity and silence and intuition is kind of like does the opposite in a necessary way. It bridges things together. And this point he makes about words defiling reality is very valid in that extent, because when we separate things, when we constantly try to label things, it detracts from our being present with them, being present with their nakedness, as he calls it. And that's a very wise observation. He probably doesn't know about the way the mind works and never even thought about it on a, scientific level, but this explanation of silence and words and their relationship really resonated with me. Also, this quote I loved: A man knows when he has found his vocation, when he stops thinking about how to live and begins to live. So much of this thinking that we have in our heads is like an endless like hamster wheel of should we do that? Like this questioning, what will who think about me doing that? Who will I affect when I do that? And who will resent me for doing that? And all of these like loops that stop us from living. And I think once a person has learned how to be more silent and more single solitude, I guess solitude filled, they establish their own integrity and they practice acting on it. And it's a kind of practice where they acknowledge that they're not perfect, but they realize that their meaning lies in the acting and their life's vocation lies in the thinking, did that work? Am I asking the right questions? Am I really living my integrity? But mostly acting and just doing things again and again and trying to get closer to that goal and that integrity and that wholeness that you aspire to. So I thought that was a great, very short quote. Yeah, he has a definition of prayer that I also kind of loved, but overall, it has some good quotes. So I don't regret reading it. Would I recommend it? Unless you're of the Christian religion, I would not strongly recommend it because it is not as universal, or at least it uses a lot of terms that I find aren't very universal. So, the next book that I read, I actually only chose this book because it's so small and so thin, and it fits perfectly in my bag, my little purse that I carry with me when I go to the city, which I visited the other weekend. And I managed to read the whole thing while I was there for 3 days. This book was such a little treasure. Like, I ended up laughing quite a lot randomly on the subway and people staring at me. But I also, it gave me like thoughts on how older these books she started writing, I think, in her 40s or 50s. So they're from a much more mature perspective, I guess you could say. And they're probably better for people who are of this similar age because she talks a lot about a kind of disillusionment. That's a chipmunk right there. Hello, chipmunk. Bye bye. Go, go, go. Why are you staring at me? Anyways, there's a kind of disillusionment to it that I think usually comes after middle age, and a kind of like undertone of melancholy, but also like a humor that is very prickly, I guess you could say. It's not self-pitying. She's super self-aware and like knowing and super observant of people's characters, but it's not self-pitying and it's very humorous in its way of like poking fun at the human condition, poking fun at how people just develop these habits and can't snap out of them and kind of dig themselves into these holes, I guess you could say. But also, it's not self pitying. Like in this book, this woman is the only child of, a mom and dad who don't have a very good relationship. And she's kind of by herself a lot. It does seem very autobiographical of Anita Brookner, and this is her first book, so I guess she was trying to, in a fictional form, recreate some of the important ideas from her upbringing. Let me just read you a couple quotes that I found so humorous. Poor Helen, poor George, those are her parents. The grandmother knew, and bore the knowledge grimly and in silence, that her son was a lightweight and her daughter-in-law a lighter weight still, that each needed the protection of the other, that neither had grown up nor would be able to grow old, and that the ardent and facile love play would damage the child. It's kind of sad that, she knows that the parents of her grandchild have this unhealthy relationship, but it makes fun of the dysfunctionality of their relationship in a way that is very, very amusing. And how this child actually is picking up on all of these relationship problems and kind of even gets disillusioned with them too later on in her books. So it also brings up a lot of different literary references, especially Balzac. She does a dissertation, I think, or some college work on him in this book, and she also actually did in real life write a lot about him and read a lot of him. And she inserts these snippets of literary reference throughout in very smart ways, I think. I actually haven't read him, so I can only know what I know from her words. Ruth, her eyes bright, had her string bag filled with vegetables and fruit, felt more like Rene de Estrade, who is an expert on sensible arrangements. What she tended to ignore these days, and her work suffered because of it, was Balzac's strange sense of the unfinished, the sudden unforeseen deaths, the endless and unexpected remorse, the mutation of one grand lady into someone else's grander wife, the ruthless pursuit of ambition. She did not understand, and few women do, that Balzac's rascally heroes are in fact consumed with a sense of vocation in which love only plays an evanescent if passionate part, that they will go on and on and on and never rest until death cuts them down. What she did understand, and this is not difficult, is Balzac's sense of cosmic energy in which all the characters are submerged until thrown up again, like atoms, to dance on the surface of one particular story, to disappear, to reappear in another guise, in another novel. No, really, Eugenie was an anomaly, so biddable, so inert on her bench in the garden, while her mother wasted away and her father grew more angry. Ruth could not remember why she had ever liked the novel in the first place. It's making fun of her not remembering why she liked the novel, while her parents are kind of like what she describes. Like her mother is wasting away and kind of a depressed actress who's no longer working and who dreams of writing a novel but doesn't really actually make any progress. And her father is growing more angry because he feels trapped in this relationship and wants to have lovers and does have lovers on the side, but he feels trapped and has to lie a lot and just deal with this unkempt house and being alone a lot, I guess, when he's not with his lovers. It's she makes these subtle like one-liners that are very, very good at poking fun at the irony of things and the humor if we can step away and stop self-pitying ourselves. Being repetitive, self-pity, whatever. But yeah, I definitely plan on reading more of her work. I actually started reading her work because Sarah from Hardcover Hearts mentioned it in a conversation with Eric of like the 5 best UK or English novelists. And I got very curious why she mentioned her. And it's also short, which is so good when you're trying to cram in. Anyways, I also ended up reading this book, Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I read it in like 3-4 days because he writes in a way that's so accessible and so easy to read, even when your brain's a little bit tired, and it's very easy to follow. Like some other books that I've been reading take a little bit more difficulty following because it's very different in the way it uses language, and there's a lot of characters and new terms in different languages, and you kind of have to remember what means what. It's tiny bit less accessible, though it's brilliant. This book is brilliant. I'll be talking about it next. But yeah, I love this book. I love Frederick Bachman because he writes with so much sympathy for all of the characters. It handles a pretty difficult topic. I recommend you look into the trigger warnings if you're going to read it. But it handles it very well and really tries to show all sides of the story and give some sympathy even for the, you know, misdoer. They were all under the influence of alcohol, they were all young, and that, people can change. People can regret, and it doesn't make it right. And it's a very complex, nuanced kind of situation that arises because of what happens. This woman gets raped, this schoolgirl. And it made me cry at the end, honestly, because of the sympathy that I developed for all of the characters and how it was hard for them to live after this because not speaking up would have been problematic, and speaking up alienates this family on such a deep level, and this girl has to live with such a deep sense of shame, I guess, and also regret, and also just pain for hurting so many people by making it such a big issue. But she couldn't act otherwise because this was her truth. And it's very hard to talk about, but this novel, I think, really hit it home for me, just like his other novel, A Man Called Uwe. Yeah, this is my second favorite novel of his, and I've read 5, I think, at this point. So I look forward to reading the sequels. Us Against You and one other one that just came out. But I read them slowly because I read them slowly as in I only pick up one book every like 2 months or so because I don't want to be finished with reading all of his work in the nearest year. So yeah, the next book I started that wasn't on my TBR pile actually was Tomb of Sand. It won the Booker International Prize, and I just really wanted to get a taste of it and why it was considered so brilliant. And even like 100 pages in, I was like, I get it. I get why they thought it was so good. So it's not as long as it seems. It is 700 pages, but they are broken up with a lot of empty space. And the playful use of language, once you get used to it, is actually very easy to follow and just get kind of hooked on, honestly. So, and it also handles, once again, pretty difficult topics about walls and barriers and labels and the partition of Pakistan from India and the massacre and rape and violence that ensued. But that's at the very end of the book. I'm in the last like 200 pages. And the first part of the book is much more focused on family, like really immersing you into Indian culture, food, kind of approaches to the elders. And it also brings up, the constructions of all of these different societal expectations and the way we separate ourselves from the other, the use of walls, normality as a problem sometimes. And it does it in a way that doesn't feel like it's getting like shoved down your throat in a kind of very like unpleasant kind of way. It feels playful, but at the same time, it does knock a punch for me personally in the way that I think she intended. It is a translation by Daisy Rockwell, so I can't read it in the original, but I am so grateful that this prize brings attention to works from other cultures, from other places, so I don't just get stuck in my little US bubble. Another international author that I'm reading now started this month is Karl Asgard. This is the fourth book in his quartet series. I read two of the other ones, Autumn and Spring. I skipped winter because I was not in the mood for winter when it was already spring, it was summerish. But yeah, this book I'm like halfway in, and it's been really good. He mixes the shorter form with the longer form here, and I don't know what to say about him because he's just such an original. And the more I read his work, the more I fall in love with his way of thinking. And this is actually something I've noticed this year, honestly, once I started doing these videos and got more active on Booktube and watched a lot more people talking about books, that my specific thing that draws me into literature, that keeps me reading, is a kind of original flow that I see in the minds of the authors, not the plot. For a lot of people, it's the plot and the narration and the way the plot flows and the characters interact and the I'm not sure how to say it, but the world is built. A lot of people like fantasy and stuff. And the ending, is it happily ever after? Does someone die? For me, it's not as much about these things as it is about what lens does the author see through? What way does his mind work or her mind work? That's why I love reading personal narrative. I love reading May Sarton's journals. I love reading his My Struggle books. I've only read the first one, but I know I'll continue to read all of them at some point. And he has such an interesting sensitivity that doesn't try to be too like he's kind of Prussian, but it's kind of also anti-Prussian, as he calls it himself, because he he doesn't try to use overly fancy language. Very diary entries and very at the same time very real, like more real than you would put in your diary entry. So it's very raw, but I just absolutely love the way his mind works. It's a very niche, I think. I mean, he is kind of a global phenomenon. His My Struggle series is a global phenomenon at some point, on some level. But he's kind of niche, but he's a niche that is really, really mine because it's a mix of personal narrative with a kind of transcendent, metaphysical, I guess you could say, perspective, along with kind of very sensitively observed. Like he talks about his children and like kind of thinks about how must they see this happening, or their little nuances of their behavior and how much they appreciate something or don't appreciate something, how they're present in the moment, what they pay attention to. And it's just so sensitively observed that it makes me a more sensitive observer. And that's why I just love his work. And I don't know if I should talk about him in all of my future videos because he is a niche author. Not everybody enjoys him, but this is what I enjoy. And if you think it might be your thing, give it a go. He's usually available in libraries, and he's very, very different. Very different in a very beautiful way. So yeah, that is my June wrap up. Quite a few books I got covered and quite a few new authors. Anita Bruckner, Tomb of Sand, and quite a few authors that I have been reading before. Frederick, Bachman, and Asgard. So yeah, if you've read any of these books, let me know what you think. And I'll try to keep the next video a little bit shorter. If you've read any of these or want me to read a certain book by one of these authors, I would love to read along with you, do a buddy read with you. Till next time.